Joining me now, trial attorney Kelly Hyman. Let's first start here. So the judge is preparing right now to read instructions to the jury, which is expected to take at least an hour, if not longer. How significant are these instructions that the judge will now be telling the jury that they must follow in this case?
They are key because the jury instructions are a roadmap to the jurors when they go and deliberate. And what I mean by roadmap is it lays out each one of the charges: racketeering, transportation across state lines to engage in prostitution, sex trafficking, and each one of the elements as well. Also, the judge lets the jury know that ultimately they are the trier of facts. And what that means is they can weigh the credibility of the witnesses, because that's going to be key for the sex trafficking charge.
I do want to ask you how you saw both the prosecution and the defense, how they did in sort of doing their closing arguments, but also laying out their case to this jury. What did you see on both sides of this?
A tale of two different stories. From the prosecution standpoint, they told a story of Diddy as someone who used power, violence, and fear to get what he wanted. And from the defense standpoint, their position was this case was about love. This case was about jealousy. This case was about infidelity. And this case was about money. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the jury to determine whether or not which side that they believe. But it's interesting in New York that 95% of cases that go to trial in the Southern District of New York come back with a guilty verdict.
That's a really interesting number. This has been a very long and sometimes complex case of lots and lots of testimony, even testimony to deal with the finances of all of this. Was there any testimony to you that really stood out that the prosecution did well? Because the defense did not put on any witnesses. This was all about their cross-examination.
And they don't have to put on any witnesses because the prosecution has the burden of proof, and they have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But from the prosecution standpoint, Cassie Ventura, Diddy's ex-girlfriend, was their star witness. If the jury believe her, then they will ultimately determine that he is guilty of sex trafficking of her.
You said that, the defense, rightly so, does not have to put on a case. This really is, the burden is on the prosecution. Was it any surprise to you that Sean Combs did not take the stand, that they did not bring in any other witnesses, but used only cross-examination really to tell the story from their perspective?
An attorney can advise his clients whether or not to take the witness stand, and ultimately it's Diddy's decision. But it was a very smart decision from the defense standpoint, because here's why. Once Diddy takes the witness stand and testifies, that opens the door for the prosecution now to come in and cross-examine him and ask him all types of questions. And that opens the door to a lot of things.
There's been a lot of talk about this case and the racketeering part of this case, racketeering conspiracy. Is that a very difficult charge to get a conviction on? A lot of prosecutors, I think, have struggled with this charge.
In regards to all the charges, the sex trafficking, the transportation across state lines, and the RICO is the hardest charge for the prosecution, but also the strongest penalty, because if convicted, he can go to life in prison for the RICO charge.
What makes it so difficult? Obviously, when you hear RICO, you usually think there are more people involved and more defendants. And this time, it is simply one man who is being accused of sort of being the mastermind of all of this.
It goes to the whole idea of this mafia, this crime family, this racketeering conspiracy. And that's what the defense really argues. This is a conspiracy, then why is he the only person being charged? Where are these other co-conspirators? The defense argues that no one out of the 34 witnesses that the prosecution brought to testify, no one said that this was a criminal enterprise. And so based on that, he should not be committed guilty of those charges.
And how long, is it unusual for it to take more than an hour or more for instructions to be given to a jury in a case like this?
That usually is about the time, because you have to remember the judge has to go through each one of the elements of the crime and explain that to the jury so they fully understand what exactly they are going to look at when they go back and deliberate.
Well, we should mention court back in session just now. They are looking at these charges, and we're expecting the judge at this hour, at this time, is already starting to read some of those instructions to the jury. So we will wait and see what happens with this case. But as you put it, there are some big numbers. 95% of cases that have come to this particular court have been convictions, correct?
Yes,
okay.
on a charge, absolutely. But ultimately, we're going to see what the jury does of whether they come back guilty or not guilty.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Kate?
Thousands of people